I will definitely say, like, the first thing about this show is that it took me a while to get into this show. It took me a long while. That was a slow burn at the start.
Yeah.
Like, what do you mean by a slow burn? Just like I know what you mean by a slow burn. I'm just wondering, like, why couldn't you get into it at first?
I don't know. Maybe it's because it's a bit older, and it was definitely showing its age compared to some other series that like just kind of still live up even though they're pretty old. And that's nothing against, like, I think it had to do with just the plot is definitely a lot slower than I expected it to be, I guess, going in.
I kind of expected some slow pacing considering this is a 2-core from 2007 or thereabouts.
Yes, I would like to say it's 2007.
So I wasn't exactly expecting it to develop terribly speedily per se, but I can totally see where you're coming from. You know, the first like 1 or 2 episodes are definitely, well, and maybe first 3 are very slow to get their characterization going in a way that made me really be like, okay, I definitely want to see more of these characters per se. Like, I wouldn't say that I really got into the show until maybe like between episode 7 and 10, probably.
Yeah, I think it's about the same thing with me, which is a
like,
bit late to think about.
Yeah, like I definitely still enjoyed it, and it wasn't as if it was a chore getting to that point.
No,
but it took a while for it to kind of hit its stride.
It basically just kind of played out with a bit like a slice of life with gags for the first 6 episodes. And then, like, the pseudo-romance that they had in the plot was actually not romantic. It was just a running joke of, like, he doesn't like her, she likes him. Isn't it funny? And then that was what it was for, like, the first 6 or 7 episodes.
Well, I mean, I definitely get what you're saying. Like, I think it was slow starting. Like, the first 3 episodes were literally just introductions to the characters.
Yeah.
Or the main characters, even the main side characters.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I couldn't get into the show until like freaking Von Strudelman. I don't know who he is.
Strudelman. That German dude.
The German dude. Yeah.
Stresemann.
Stresemann.
Yes, him. Thank you. Not Strudelman. But yeah, like I couldn't get really into the show until I saw him, and I guess that's when they kind of touched more on the musical aspect of it, because I think a lot of the stuff you said was correct. I think, to me at least, I felt like this show was a lot more comedy oriented and not romance oriented, especially in like the first half of the show. Like there were actually points I particularly questioned, that I was like, wait a minute, are they together and I just don't know it? Or like, are they not together? Like, this is weird. And yeah.
And Streisman, I think, comes in on episode 5.
Yeah.
And that's...
Is he really that late in?
Yeah.
It's 4 or 5, somewhere around there.
Okay.
Yeah, he comes in, I'm pretty sure... No, it's 4, okay. Yeah, he comes in on 4, and then, like, that's when things start to shake up, just because we're introduced to our characters by that point, and so they're now starting with the actual plot of the show. So from here on out, it's actually progressing with both of our main characters and the side characters just getting better and better, and this perverted German dude helping them along the way.
Yeah, he is quite the character,
Yeah.
Von Struselman. He had some very weird moments, like that moment in episode 5 when he makes that fucking weird lip sucky face. When he tries to kiss Nodame. For some reason, I can't get that image out of my head. It was just like so protruding at the end of the episode, and I was just like,
it was
God.
Pretty upsetting. I just after that whole scene and that whole build up for that episode, just having him be like, give us a smooch, Nodame, give us a smooch. And then just having it like slowly zoom in closer on his face.
It was just fucking weird.
But and in a way, it felt like that sort of, to me, encapsulated a lot, or the entire show's style of humor in some weird way. Like, I feel like if you were to ask what is the humor of the show, you could just like give that picture, and that would kind of be it.
Yeah, I mean, I actually the first episode I thought the humor was really weird, and then like a couple episodes in, I kind of got into it, and I just kind of rolled with it at that point. I thought it was hilarious.
I was actually a little nervous up front, just because like most of the humor was let's abuse our only female main character in the show.
It was that, and the fact that she was just making a bunch of fart jokes and things of that nature.
It was just weird humor. Like, I don't even like that humor.
It was just odd, and I get they were doing that to kind of show, oh, look at this eccentric, piano phenom or whatever. But it was odd. Like that first episode, I just finished watching it, and I kind of sat there for a minute, and I was like, do I want to go directly into episode 2 after this?
Maybe I should just go ahead and take a break. I will say though, from the get-go, even though the 3D and the CGI looks really freaking weird, I do have to congratulate them that it's at least accurate to what's being played on screen as far as the hand movements for the different instruments. And musically, like audibly, it's they're doing a lot of interesting stuff. Like episode 5, they even have the thing where like Chucky for the first time gets to conduct in front of an orchestra, and he notices all the small little things that are wrong with the piece as it's going on, and I was like, oh, I noticed those as well. Okay, cool.
Yeah, as our resident person that actually knows things about music, I was kind of curious to see how you responded to.
Well, I mean, it was like sometimes like Chicky would be up there on stage and he'd be like, y'all are playing it horribly wrong, and I'm listening to it, I'm like, I can't hear shit, because I could not understand for the life of me what was wrong about it necessarily.
Yes. See, that was the thing. It was kind of interesting to me, going into this, because I'm generally used to these sort of things where if there's like a mentor kind of character, if it's like in a sports show or like some kind of like basic shonen whatever or something, there's always some clear indication of here's how y'all are messing this up. And to me, I'm like, this sounds fine. Like,
yeah,
what's the problem here?
Well,
I don't really understand, but.
And it got a little bit better for me, like, as the series went on, but it still was a lot of moments of, like, I don't quite understand why they're saying that that's wrong. With some rare exceptions where, like, the strings were quiet or something like that. Yeah. It was like, oh, clever.
But so, like, the thing to me is it's interesting to go into this as someone having an outsider perspective on this, because, I'm like, okay, well, within their actual, like, within their wheelhouse of classical music knowledge, that there is clearly something wrong. But to me, I'm like, okay, well, just take me along for the ride. I'll believe you.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that I noticed some of that stuff, like not the musical errors or flaws that you were talking about, because I swear that it sounded fine just to me, but I think that like the music lined up perfectly, as you said, with the CGI and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I also think that maybe we weren't supposed to hear some of the errors sometimes, because I mean, I think that actually is a reflection on Chiaki's character, and that's just the kind of person he is. I actually kind of relate to him a little bit in the fact that like he is just, I don't know if you noticed, you probably did because they harped on this a lot. He is just some kind of perfectionist.
Yeah.
Like he just goes balls
he's
to the
pretty
wall.
neurotic about every aspect of the music.
That's actually a really common trait as far as conductors and arrangers and people who arrange the music and different things like that. It's actually very common in the music industry is a certain neuroticism that's there just because they want perfection out of a very subjective kind of idea of music.
Right. And yeah, I think that there were a lot of instances where that was kind of happening. So maybe that's why we couldn't hear anything, because I don't think he was tuned to it more so than he was like trying to find imperfections, and then he just like that's all he could hear was the imperfections.
I kept
and it drove him crazy.
I kept on getting flashbacks to all of my like old band practices. It was horrifying because like our instructor used to legitimately chuck the baton at us sometimes and get really fucking pissed off, and like yeah, and he would just like he would just stop it and just yell at us for 10 minutes and then start over again, and I'm like, oh gosh. And like whenever, because Chiaki, his progression as a character is that he was harsh, but he did show positive reinforcement as well. That was like the thing that he learned as the series went on. But like at that beginning where it's just nothing but negative reinforcement, I was just like, oh gosh, I'm going through high school again. It was really scary.
Absolutely fair.
Yeah.
I will say that, and I haven't seen the movie yet, but Whiplash, that's come out yet, a live action movie. It seemed like there was some similarities in that idea of like striving and reaching for that perfection, both from the instrumentalists and from the conductor himself. And I thought it was interesting just because of what I've seen of Whiplash, and then comparing it to this anime and seeing a very similar theme and idea. And I guess that's just something that's like touched on a lot with music. It's just people trying to be the greatest that they can be at the music, and like really, really striving and kind of being very neurotic about the whole thing.
Yeah. I mean, this show touched on that a lot early on, and I mean, they touched on it some later too. About that kind of concept of we need to be perfect, or you try to reach perfection but you can't, and you can't make it perfect because then it kind of like takes the feeling out of the music. I mean, and that the whole theme, whatever, was tossed around all the time.
And it's touched on very differently with a lot of different characters, especially with say Nodame's storyline, in where everyone surrounding her is always saying, you have such talent, you could do so much more, you could be going to contests, and you could be studying abroad and things like that. And she's like, I just want to play for fun, guys.
Yeah,
please. Considering having the whole traumatic teacher background, which isn't expanded on a lot in this season.
No, but I think we saw what we needed to see as far as that goes.
And that's the thing, for what we got, I didn't feel like, they needed to go into any deep backstory. It's like, okay, well, she had a pretty bad experience with a teacher in a formative time in her musical development.
Hey, he beat the shit out of her with a shoe. Like, this is really fucked up.
No, I thought it was like he like smacked her so hard that she flew into a wall and her shoes like flew off.
Oh yeah.
Such force.
The shoe was her shoe that just fell on the ground.
Yeah.
But like,
I don't think it matters what she got hit with.
She still got it.
She got straight up abused.
Yeah, we still saw her get smacked the fuck up, and then she hits a wall and starts bleeding. Like, it's bad.
Yeah. And I just do.
But I did like, and this is something that happens much later on in the series. But I did like that. She was the person that pulled herself from her bootstraps like up. It wasn't that she relied on her lover to help her get through that. She found her own inner strength in order to overcome that problem. Not at the time during the concert when she needed it, but after the fact she was able to recover on her own. Right. And I was like, awesome, that's really cool. They do a lot of things with that as far as her character. I interrupted, I'm sorry. But like,
no.
I just really liked how, like, as far as her character went, a lot of things she like I felt it was a very like strong positive message for this one female character in the show, because she did a lot on her own and like managed to get a lot done both for her and Chiaki throughout the series. And she wasn't wholeheartedly reliant on the character, even though she was literally draping off of him for most of the show.
Something that was particularly interesting to me is, sort of piggybacking off of the whole pulling yourself up by your bootstraps thing, is I was kind of surprised to the degree of how much the show allowed many of its characters to actually fail in the show and things of that nature. Like, there were a lot of points during this story where I was actually left questioning, oh, are they actually going to pull this off? Like, I actually felt somewhat worried, especially like, say in, Nodame's whole arc, actually in her piano contest. So there was a point where I was thinking, oh God, is she actually going to pull this off? And there was a point where I was like, I'm not actually 100% sure how this is going to go, because up until that point, we had seen, Chiaki had obviously failed miserably in his conducting in several points until he finally improved and things of that nature. And there were other characters that were upstaged by other incoming other musicians for the orchestra. And so it was really interesting to see how much development all the characters were able to get in the show. Even the side characters had a lot of really interesting progression or development by the end of the season. And I really enjoyed the effort they put into giving these characters a lot of life in that sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, I think they did the suspense factor really well. I'm kind of a little disappointed that they didn't make Chiaki's failure a big deal, but at the same time, it was always just small points in the episode. He never had a big failure, but I also think that was part of the show's strength, was that they didn't over dramatize his failures. In the fact that, because I think if they would have emphasized it too much, it would have completely ruined the happy kind of it would have ruined the comedy of the show. I think they balanced the comedy and the drama very well with how they did it. And I think by not emphasizing some of the bigger failures, by not emphasizing those, I think they really kind of made the drama very light in regards to that. I think it made it feel more realistic, I think.
Yeah, I feel like
the tone consistent.
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to say.
That's what I was trying to say. Yeah,
because they start off the show with this tone that's very lighthearted initially, and I felt like after 3 or 4 episodes of the same lighthearted emotion, if it had just suddenly taken turns into very, very dramatic moments in the show, it would have felt a little off and weird. And I'm glad that they didn't do that. It didn't turn into a Hana Yamada kind of situation where everything's happy-go-lucky and then all of a sudden people are fucking crying in the streets for no reason whatsoever. There was no over dramatic moments. I thought it was well played, that it was just a little bit of light drama that the characters managed to overcome, and then we have lighthearted elements throughout that.
Yeah, it never really felt like they introduced any kind of forced drama that felt like it was way too much and was actually going against the sort of tone and atmosphere the show was trying to set for its story.
Yeah, it was they introduced some plot points and ideas I wasn't entirely sold on, but as far as the drama goes, the drama felt fine. I thought that was well played.
Yeah, it made the show stand out for sure. I've never seen a show before that balanced comedy and drama, and somehow still keep the drama and still have comedy be a heavy emphasis.
Yeah, even moments whenever some characters were crying, they were still throwing jokes at you. But it didn't feel off or weird. Yeah.
It didn't. And I mean, it didn't feel I wasn't completely crying. There's no moment in this show where I was oh my God, the feels and I know some people like that. And that's fine. But this wasn't this kind of show. It wasn't one of those shows where you're going to cry heavily. It was the fact that, okay, you see their failures and you see that, you kind of feel down about it. And then you pull yourself back up and you just go at it again. That's the kind of feel this show had. That, there's no big down moment. It was just, you're feeling... I mean, there were big down moments for the characters, but you weren't, soaked in it and immersed in it for very long. It was... And you just kind of pulled yourself back out of it, or the characters pulled themselves out of it, I should say.
Yeah. Yeah. That said, there were some things I didn't like as far as plot points go. It was early on, there was one part where Chiaki becomes the mascot for the S orchestra, and the reason for that is that she plays piano, and so she can't be in the orchestra. And I was that makes no damn sense, because I have personally been to multiple orchestral symphonies or concerts, and there was piano there and it was a main part. Sometimes it had a solo, That's why for like several, and it was weird too because like initially they say, oh, she can't be in the orchestra because she plays piano and piano is not going to be accepted as part of the orchestra, and then like just like 3 or 4 episodes later, all of a sudden Chiaki's playing a piano solo with an orchestra. And I was like, what?
I mean, I don't know any backgrounds about those pieces or if they have pianos. I mean, I'm sure that there are pieces that have piano parts. I just don't know if those pieces that they did. So I kind of just like, maybe that was a choice on their part.
Yeah, that's the thing. I just assumed that it was for the pieces that they were choosing to do for that specific thing. You know, they were trying to go for. Okay, well, here's how we're going. And another way was that you know, that specific orchestra, the S orchestra, was comprised of all the students who were massively behind, or something of that nature. So, I mean, I guess it's plausible that there might have been some pianists that were miserably behind.
Well, technically, Nodame was behind because she couldn't stay at tempo, and a whole bunch of other problems. She always just played it as she felt.
Yeah.
Maybe. Oh,
no,
sorry.
no.
Oh, I was just gonna say that I think maybe that was just their way of telling Nodame that she wasn't good enough to play, but they weren't telling her that. I mean, I don't think they were being like heavily deceitful about it, but I'm just saying that's a theory.
Yeah, it just felt weird because like after a while I understood that it was like, okay, it was just that specific piece with that specific arrangement does not include a piano. But at the time they were just like, oh well, piano's not an orchestra is like literally the quote from that scene. And I'm like, that's not true. That just rubbed me the wrong way.
Yeah, I understand.
As a person who likes music and who likes orchestra, it was they would sometimes say something and I'm like, that's not true. It was like Streisman said something along the lines of, you can't just play it, you have to showboat while you're on stage. And he was like telling him to like wiggle around and move and different things like that. And I was like, that's not at all what you do. That's completely incorrect.
Well, I kind of took that as a metaphor. Like, you need to feel the music, I think is what he was trying to say. You need to writhe in agony, like the person that writing this music and conducting this music felt. You need to do that. I don't think it was like a literal, you need to move around.
But he was, I just thought, he was like legitimately showing him physically, though.
I know, but I think that was just for us, Strassman's, whatever the fuck. His name, the German dude.
The German pervert,
I think that was just his brand.
Yeah, I just assumed that was his own sort of like
weird
directorial
personality
flair sort of thing. And so like I kind of get that because, you know, in that he was talking about, you know, well, you have to make this a show for the audience too. You know, it goes beyond just the music or whatever. And I was like, I mean, okay, sure, I guess I can get where you're coming from there. I don't think it's necessary, but okay, you're the director, so Von Strudelheim your way into our hearts.
It was just like small minor things like that poked at me for like the first half of the series, and then I felt like they just kind of dropped a lot of that for the second half. It was like they still had a lot of like really good statements on music and orchestra, but like it all felt correct to me. It was just initially whenever I went into the show, there was like small little things that were like getting under my skin. I was watching, I was like, that's not true. You don't do that.
Well, I really think a lot of that might have been just contributed to bad wording on the subtitles.
It could be, because these subtitles are really fucking old.
They're also really fucking garbage.
I'm not going to disagree with you on that, because I could like clearly see grammar errors as I was going through. Just filled with grammatical errors. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, God. What a savage seagull.
Well.
Oh, and then there was also the one thing that always pissed me off though about this, and it has nothing to do with the plot of the show or like anything else like that. It was mostly just has to do with the animation. Is that like, yeah, the CGI looked really fucking weird at some points, but at least it was showing the instruments accurately. Like the fingerings on the violin were the actual fingerings. And the movements and different things like that. But the conducting was just a still shot of Chiaki or some other conductor, and they never move their arms. They would even legitimately have CGI violins going to fucking town and like and actually moving, but then Chiaki's just holding his wand up and nothing's going on. I was like,
I mean, if we're being honest here, the show is kind of like watching a PowerPoint presentation.
a lot of times it was.
Or about half of it, where you just have classical music over it.
And I was fine with it whenever the music was emphasized, but whenever the whole point of the scene is to showcase how good of a conductor he is, and he's not conducting, like, we can't see that, that bothered me. Because, like, people in the audience would be like, wow, his movements are so graceful, or they would just be like, wow, he's such a great conductor, and I'm like, yeah, watch him, he's just, like, holding his hands real still, and I'm like, that's beautiful, yeah, it's a good job right there, applause, bravo.
And I mean, like, I'd say, you know, PowerPoint with classical music over it, but I'm gonna be honest. The more I watch the show, the less it actually bothered me, and I feel like it would in any other show per se. But I could almost be okay with it for this show because it does put a lot of emphasis on the music per se, and so you know, for a genre, for a medium of art and entertainment here that is, you know, so visually driven as anime is, to have a show that is actually musically focused, you know, I felt more like, okay, well, you know, whatever they have all these stills, fine, I can focus more on the actual music and the experience of, you know, the auditory portion of this actual show. So I'm not saying it's like, oh, such a great artistic direction here to, to do less visually and more in audio.
Right.
I mean, I'm sure it came a lot down to budget, but it worked in context for the show.
Right. It was like a lot of scenes.
Boy, howdy, there was some good music.
Yeah, it was a lot of panning over still frames, but I did love the music so much, and some of the arrangements were actually, I believe, completely original for this show. Like, they had before the really fucking awesome scene in episode 11, they had the one in episode 10, which was Rhapsody in Blue, except for it was arranged for just a hodgepodge of instruments. Like, the pianicas had the main clarinet melody. Yes. Which, as a clarinetist, originally I was like, oh no, I don't know if I'm gonna like that. And then, like, whenever all the other pianicas came in, I was like, oh wait, this is great, this is fantastic. There's a squirrel playing the solo melody to Rhapsody in Blue.
Mongoose.
Oh right, a mongoose.
Mongoose.
But like,
right.
It was. I listened to it audibly, and it was like, and it was completely different from other recordings that I've heard before that are famous recordings. And I was like, it must have been actually produced originally for this show, which is probably where some of that budget went to.
Yeah.
Like, but
which would make a lot of sense. You had to get a whole orchestra together for this. So.
Yeah, but it sounded great. Yeah. I loved it.
Oh yeah.
Oh my God.
The music was definitely heavily focused upon in the anime. But before I get into that, I just want to make a comment about the visuals. There was a lot of stills, and you should. I wish you could go through the episodes to just count the number of panning shots over stills that you had. There was a lot. They
also did the dramatic one where they had a shot from the anime and then like did a whole like textured paint over of it, and then like pan, like up and then slow up on the same exact shot to make it dramatic. They did that like 50 times.
I like that though. I think that's humorous. I think that's
funny. It was funny.
It really got to a point where I just didn't care at all. I was like, okay, just go ahead. You can just show me like single frame shots for an entire episode. Just shovel it on.
Yeah, I mean, JC staff shows back then are very much like this too. For some reason, they're just always like still pan again, another still pan, and I'm like, okay, well that's interesting. Like, there's not much fluid animation besides when characters have to move.
It kind of reminded me of like recently, whenever somebody was doing, it was Canada Effect did a comparison between the original Pokemon series and the new Pokemon series that's coming out, Sun and Moon. Yes. And I loved that he showed a shot that was a still shot that was panned over, and then they just drew hands that didn't even look like they were attached to the characters' bodies that just popped up from the bottom of the screen, and they were like holding like their Pokédex or whatever. And I was like, that looks so weird because like the hands don't even look like they're attached to the characters; they just pop into the frame. And then the rest of the camera movement is just a pan over that same exact still shot, and it was like that just looks weird. And so I thought it was cool that the new Pokemon was very very fluid, which is what Cantabile was trying to say. But like this show reminded me of that sometimes, except for instead of hands that don't look attached to the bodies, it was just CGI hands.
Yeah. Yeah, some of the CGI scenes were a little weird, but most of them were all right. And yeah, some of them were just uncanny.
I gave him a pass because of accuracy, but
yeah, I mean, I passed them as well because it didn't look atrocious. It just looked weird.
They were just some standout parts.
Yeah.
You know what I thought was interesting as far as the CGI goes?
Oh, go ahead. What's up?
I was gonna say what I found interesting as far as the CGI is that a lot of modern use of CGI is like background characters and stuff like that they hope you don't notice. But did you notice what they did for this show is that all the CGI was in the foreground, and then the background characters were actually just like painted for like a lot of.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Yeah, a lot
of watercolor painting almost.
Yes, it was almost a watercolor painting for the audiences for all these different concerts that were going on.
Which I thought that was cool. You don't see that much anymore.
Yeah, no.
That's very old school.
It was pretty refreshing, honestly.
Instead of just random CG characters.
Oh God, let's don't talk about Mahoka. Let's not go there.
You just read my mind.
We can't do that. Yeah, and I think a lot of the strengths of the show were because it was so musically focused. Heck, like I don't even like classical music, but this anime made me like interested in classical music. Like I am genuinely interested now.
I've been listening to,
and like I kind of just want to listen to some of the concertos and stuff like that now.
It's a concerto. Thank you.
Yeah, I found a bunch of the different things that they got together, and I've been listening to like a Baroque playlist, like when I've been working this past week. It's just been, this is so nice. It's so refreshing. And I can't say for, how long I'm going to consistently keep listening to it. But, for now, for the time being, it's just like, oh, yes, this is actually giving me some degree of interest more than I normally have.
Yeah, even for me, a lot of the songs that they played, I actually didn't know because I do know like a decent amount of classical music, but like as far as like Mozart, Beethoven, and like just a whole bunch of other people, they made a lot of music. Dvorak, Debussy, Tchaikovsky. So like it was cool that they didn't, for this show, they didn't do all the ones everybody knows by heart because they're just ingrained within society. They did a lot of like they did a lot of like interesting songs that you probably haven't heard of before, because like they would show like Tchaikovsky or Dvorak or somebody like that, and I'm like, oh, I know that person, I wonder what this piece is, and then I listen to it and I'm like, I don't actually know this one. So it enticed me to like learn a little bit more about the people that I even knew, because like a lot of those pieces were pretty sweet.
Yeah, like, and we haven't really talked about it yet, but the concert in episode 11,
oh my god,
it was like that one was so good.
That took up half the episode, and it was so good.
It was a solid 8-minute uninterrupted scene, and at least a good 6 or 7 minutes of that had no actual dialogue.
None.
It was just the music, and that was honestly probably the highest point of the series for me.
Yeah.
And like, and I'm not saying like after that it was downhill. It's just,
it was such a standout moment.
It's just it's for everything that the show has been talking about like really connecting with the music and just really trying to feel it and experience it. Like, that was,
it allowed the audience to feel and experience it as well.
Yeah, it was unbelievable.
It was. I
It was
love
really
that
It gave
too.
me chills.
I think the best thing about that is that like not only was it the amount of accuracy as far as like the visuals was a lot of panning over still shots, but every now and then they would show CGI to really like push a particular thing. But I think the best thing about that is, like you said, there was no dialogue for like 6 minutes of that. It was just uninterrupted. This is the song, and yeah, I mean the full song's like 30 minutes long, but like, and so they definitely did shorten it down. But what we got felt like just a complete uninterrupted, like really beautiful moment within the anime that they just absolutely are pushing everything audibly at you. And supporting it minimalistically through the actual visuals, and I think it worked perfectly for this. It worked really well. I loved it. Yeah, so I absolutely agree with you.
Yeah, that moment was great. I actually went and looked up because I was kind of curious about this, about like maybe 15 episodes of the show, about how like the pieces, what like some of the background of some of these pieces, and I looked up the one for episode 11, the
Rachmaninoff.
Yeah, the concerto number 2, C minor, whatever the fuck.
It's Opus 18.
It's OP 17, Op 17, whatever the
Opus 18.
Yeah, Opus.
Okay, all right, that's what it is. I looked up the background of this piece. Turns out that he composed this as his second one, as I guess the title says, number 2. At the premiere of his first symphony, was derided by a bunch of critics, and so the second one basically was his coming off of a depression and this kind of slump that he was in, and I found that really interesting.
So he just put all of those emotions into the piece.
Yeah, he put a lot of his emotions into the piece.
Oh, but that's really interesting for Chiaki.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, is that like Chiaki was trying to get into the groove with the piece, and he was coming off of like, he wanted it to be perfect, and he was taking all this criticism from Stressman and like the orchestra. He was taking all that in, and he was just like, I need to put that feeling into this piece.
Right, because this was after Stressman had like basically failed him on his first attempt at, this sort of conduction and orchestra. So, that's very nice.
And I think that makes sense for the writers too, because that's probably what they were thinking of. Because they mention in other situations, like as an offhand, like, oh hey, did you know this piece? Blah 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 blah, and it fits it fits the situation that the character is in. But I like that they did that for pieces, but they just didn't explain the history of the piece. It was just like the writers themselves are the only ones that know, but they actually wrote it to they wrote it to match the character in that situation.
Right, and I kind of actually had a feeling they were going to try to do something like that, so that's the reason I went and looked it up, just to see, like, because I think that's a very important part of when you're making an anime, is how close to how accurate can you make this, and how, I don't want to say meta, but how much can you make this relate to the real world? And they made that piece was spot on. Like, and I looked up a couple other pieces, and they're pretty much the same way. One of the interesting things about the Rachmaninoff piece was that apparently Rachmaninoff's depression was cured by hypnotherapy. Which is kind of,
are you kidding me?
I cannot even make this shit up.
So Chiaki's own hypnotherapy attempts and different things like that throughout the show is directly inspired by Rachmaninoff, probably.
He's supposed to be a Rachmaninoff.
Yeah,
what do you know?
That's also really
in
interesting.
Some way.
Fun facts.
Okay, well that makes a lot more sense, because the hypnotherapy and everything just seemed
a little
such
weird.
It seemed like such an odd detail to me. I was like, are we watching Golden Time right now or something? Like, what's happening here? Are we about to get spooky here for a second? But so actually having that context makes that actually contextually make a lot more sense.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, the show itself did a good job of, like, when they initially introduced the idea of the hypnotherapy, he goes home and then he like goes in a room and he's like, "Hi, this is a psychologist specializing in hypnotherapy." And he's like, "Again, somebody else trying to fix me." And apparently, you get like a small little subtext of like, this has happened multiple times in his life and it just hasn't worked to cure his phobias. But now it makes a hell of a lot more sense.
Yeah,
fascinating.
I thought that was really interesting. I had no idea until I looked it up, and I was like, wow, that is some meta shit. Like, that is legit what I said when I found it out. It blew my mind.
I'm really glad you actually go and look these things up, because I never would have thought to actually. That thought never really crossed my mind, to be like, okay, well, I wonder, how much crossover there is between this and Rachmaninoff's history and things like that. So
yeah, it was kind of like
as I said, bravo.
Bravo. But yeah, like Nodame's Chopin piece, or Chopin, or whatever.
Chopin.
Chopin.
Yes, thank you. I'm gonna get that wrong every single time.
Okay.
All right, and
I get the Japanese the Japanese names wrong every time. So
yeah, so
yeah, it's fine. I just thought that piece was interesting when Nodame played it for her concert, because that piece also reflected a feeling of bubbling with life and spurting flames, according to some critics. I thought that was just interesting because, Nodame is exactly that. She's full of life and fiery, and how she plays reflects that very well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So there's stuff like that. And I looked up quite a few of these, and it's very consistent, and I'm very glad it's very consistent. It actually raised the view of the anime in my eyes, because now I have context, and I think it's really cool that they did their research.
Yeah. It's really done to the point where I am actually really motivated to watch the remaining seasons of this that are available, because I'm like, this wasn't like the best thing I've ever watched per se, but it's got me invested enough in the characters by the end of this first season that I'm like, okay, I mean, this is a lot more I'd have to watch, sort of, but I'm invested in seeing how these characters actually go on and fully develop further. And so, now we're doubling on like the actual like musical cross play here and there, and I'm like, oh, okay, cool, sure, show me more.
Well, apparently the sequel series is only like 12, 13 episodes, so it wouldn't be that bad to actually get through that.
Yeah.
The other, Matt, you mentioned what were we talking?
There was two seasons. I know I said one the other day to you, Kyle, but turns out there actually is two, like I originally thought. Yeah, there's 2 seasons of 11 after this.
Oh, okay. Oh, I see it. There's a third season. Okay.
Yeah, I didn't see it initially either. But yeah, so I mean, I'd be really down for watching more. Like, I really thought I was going to go into this show and I was not going to understand anything, and then I expected there to be a lot more romantic drama, and then I expected there to be a lot more like not emphasis on the music, and for some reason everything just got turned on its head when I started watching the show. And yeah, I still have quite a few complaints about the series, but I feel like this was a good series, and I feel like I would watch more if I felt like it. I'd kind of have to be in the mood for it, but I would definitely watch more.
I would probably say that the majority of my complaints come down to the actual visuals for the show, in that like there's a lot of CGI used, there's a lot of just panning shots over still images. At the same time, it's like not every show can be Kids on the Slope. It was like Kids on the Slope is kind of an exception to the rule whenever it comes to music shows, and that it was incredibly accurate and it used a lot of very clever techniques to make things look and feel very realistic and cool. But that also came out multiple years after this did. So like
that was in 2011, I think.
Yeah, the
so
technology got a lot better.
Later.
The tech got a lot better. The like techniques for actually doing this kind of thing got a lot better. So I think that definitely helped that show out, and I feel like Nodame Cantabile definitely like laid the groundwork for that kind of thing.
Right. And I mean, my complaints about the show were basically that it was really slow, for one.
Yeah.
Of course, I looked up the writer, and apparently it's the same writer that did Kimi no Todeke and Nana. Both of those shows. And
that makes a lot of sense in some ways.
It does. I don't know much about Nana, but I know I watched Kimi ni Todoke, and it was the slowest thing on earth. So it was exactly like this. It was very slow progressing, and we didn't get anything until like near the end of the series, like with this show romantically. I mean, like any confirmation or any kind of expository feelings or about the characters or anything like that. Any follow up, I guess, is what I should be saying. So that series was kind of like that too. It was just very slow until like the end. So it made a lot of sense.
Yeah, I that was something that I didn't like just because maybe because I went in with the wrong expectations. It's like I saw the romance tag and I was like, "Oh, okay, that might be interesting." And then there really wasn't romance for the majority of this show. So it was like the biggest slow burn in the world until you get to the very end, and then everything's kind of like rushed a little forward.
Yeah, and I mean that just comes down to taste. I mean, I wasn't really a particular. I was kind of expecting the same thing. I was expecting a lot more romance heavy and not more music heavy, because music heavy shows are almost non-existent anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's that.
And I was definitely pleasantly surprised about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I was
different.
Yeah, because I was fully expecting, hey, this is a show about music, but hey, it's really not. It's a show that has other elements, and music is kind of featured in it. But it actually made, music like a central core pillar of the show that was, consistently thematically gone back to time and time again. And I was really pleasantly surprised at how much effort they put into making the music such a central part of the show.
Mm-hmm.
It's really nice.
But at the same time, and this might just be me, but I kind of have another small complaint, and the fact is that I kind of wish that I really like that they harp on have a central theme, they have all this stuff going on. One thing I wasn't really a fan of was the fact that I felt like there was an arc, and then we reverted, and then we went through the same thing again, and it reverted again. And I felt like that just kept happening over and over. It was kind of like I was watching different parts of the same show, which I was. And then, the theme wouldn't change, but the way... It's kind of like they didn't learn from their experiences, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
I was thinking that was maybe what you were getting at. And as far as the main characters go, no, they never learned from their experiences, which was kind of bothersome. And in what times that they actually did learn, we didn't really get that much. So, for instance, Chiaki always has this thing where he's consistently negative to other people and is very strict. But then he finally learns that that's not the way to do things, and then it just cuts to the actual performance. Instead of showing him actually practicing that positive reinforcement during the practice, it just cuts to the performance, and all of the performers are just like, "Hey, we're so glad you lightened up on us," and it's like, well, we didn't see that happen. And that bothered me. And then just the very next episode, all of a sudden he was being super super strict with them again. It was very inconsistent as far as the actual characters, how they grew, but by the end of the series it did get better. But it still had that underlying problem that definitely annoyed me a bit.
I mean, I guess I could understand it. I mean, we're dealing with two very stubborn characters, apparently.
Yeah,
that's kind of
that's an understatement.
So, I mean, I guess I could see that. I guess I kind of would have liked to see it done in a different way each time. And I know they tried to do that. They tried to put them in new scenarios and without straying from the theme too much. I just wanted to see a little bit more of them branching out, getting a little bit closer to a resolution, instead of me going, okay, so that just happened and now we're doing it again. Is it going to get resolved this time, or is it going to just repeat again? I didn't feel like there was any progression until near the end of the series.
Yeah,
so
within maybe the past 6 episodes or something.
Yeah. I kind of just, I don't know, that kind of stuff kind of bothers me if I don't see any kind of progression.
That's fair.
I guess, yeah, I guess that's all I have to say on the topic.
No, I think you're right though. I think that was something that bothered me, and it didn't really rear its head initially because it took like 6 episodes to get going. But like once it actually started to get
Mhm.
going, and we started to have these themes of Chiaki's too strict of a character. He needs to lighten up and understand a better way to teach. And then Nodame needs to be better at piano in the sense that like while she's a virtuoso, she always just constantly changes tempo and is very erratic in her playing. It's like that just never changed. Not until like the last, I want to say like the last little bit of the show. It was constantly a rolling cycle of yay they finally fixed it, and then the very next episode they're back to being broken, and then they fixed it back to being broken.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess that's what I was trying to say is that, like, for example, Nodame would, like, she'd practice the piano after a big performance by Chiaki or something, and she'd get motivated, then she'd practice, and she'd get it all right, she'd fix all her problems, and then something would happen, and she would get thrown back off again,
Mm-hmm.
and then she would go back to the exact same way she was, and that happened a couple times in the series. And I mean, I kind of understand. It kind of actually gave me this kind of weird. I tried to justify this in my head by saying it's kind of like a college cram thing, where like you're practicing for the competition, so you get really good at it, and then after the competition's over, you just stop and you get lazy again. Like it's almost what it felt like.
That is absolutely fair, actually.
That's actually a really great way to describe it.
That's a good analogy.
Except for we're talking about characters like progression as characters and like their emotions and feelings. It's just the same thing they crammed in and like really studied, and then they just completely forgot all about their emotions and feelings.
Yeah.
See,
That bothers me a lot, but at the same time, I do think that the show still has so much good merit to it that like the minor, it kind of comes off as a minor point in the end, just because it still is a good show.
Yeah, it still does everything it does well. It's just there's small things here and there that are just like
Yeah.
But yeah, I felt like it was I definitely have a lot of respect for the show and what it does, and definitely a lot more respect for the medium of classical music. Like, holy crap.
Yeah, I think they definitely did their job in like just teaching to regular people like what classical music is, how it sounds, and how varied it can be, and how interesting it can be. The last part being the biggest message that they tried to put across.
Yeah, it's almost like watching. I wish I kind of would have had this for like a music appreciation course, and I could have appreciated classical music a lot better if I would have just watched this anime first.
Yeah. Well, anything else that you guys wanted to say?
Nothing is immediately coming to mind. I feel like we hit on all the major things that I liked/disliked about the show.
Matt?
Let's see. The only other thing I could even think about touching on is that, like, did you guys notice that there was a lot of, like, weird, like, I don't want to say gay characters, because I don't think that's the right term.
There were a lot of dudes lusting after Chiaki.
And there was, it was like dudes, and then they had that one character that they, like, mixed and matched the pronouns with for a while until they finally just stuck with male pronouns for the rest of the show. And I'm not sure like what exactly they were trying to state there. And I'm wondering if that was just because they wanted to represent what a conservatory is, where it's going to be a lot of liberal college kids. And so like a lot of those like free thinkers and a lot of those people that are a bit more unique or quirky will definitely be drawn to those types of places rather than maybe a more conservative college. I was wondering if maybe that's something that they were just doing, just a representation kind of idea. But even if that's the case, it was only like one or two characters, and it was kind of brought as kind of the butt of the joke rather than being interesting representation. So I don't know.
I guess it differs from person to person. I thought it was just interesting to get kind of. I didn't feel it. I felt like they were actually real characters and they weren't there just for a gag.
No, yeah, I mean
they were part of the gag a lot of times, but I didn't feel like they were there just for the gag because they had good progression.
Right.
Yeah, they actually did a whole lot of development from going to being semi-incompetent to actually getting prestigious place in philharmonic orchestras and things like that.
Yeah, like the timpani player especially, I think, was a great character that, like, at first he seemed just kind of like, he just seemed kind of like a jokey character and didn't really seem to take things that entirely seriously. He was even dancing in the middle of concerts, like as he's playing the timpani. But then, like, as he progresses as a character, he becomes an incredibly sought after individual. Like, he was even being asked to, or he even applied for jobs in like different countries and things like that, and he was top. He was top of his game. I thought that was very cool that even these smaller characters were getting represented like that. But, like, particularly in the case of like these characters that I will say, like, while I did say that they were a bit of the butt of the joke, I think that was incorrect of me to say. It was like they are characters in their own right. It was just there's not many of them.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I don't really know how you could make more of them. I mean, I guess you could put more of them in. I don't think I guess this isn't really the appropriate anime to do that in. But
The series,
I guess it could be,
didn't
but-
need it, and I like that those characters were there. They definitely, like, rounded out the cast very well.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I guess that's what I was trying to say, is that I think it spiced it up a little bit. So I thought it was interesting.
All right. Well, anything else?
I'm
good.
I think I'm tapped out. I think I have said my piece.
Okay. Well, I guess we will see everybody next time. Bye.
Bye.
No, bye.